A limestone tablet sits in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Bodleian Library in Oxford, its surface scored with Paleo-Hebrew script that has not been touched by human hands in over 300 years. The stone is cool to the touch, even through archival gloves. Its edges are worn smooth, not by weather but by repeated handling. Centuries of it. Someone held this tablet, read it, copied it, and then someone else buried it. In 1559, the Congregation of the Index, established under Pope Paul IV, issued a decree that explicitly named the Sefer HaYashar, the Book of Jasher, among texts prohibited from circulation within Catholic territories. The decree cited the work as containing narratives contrary to received doctrine and injurious to the integrity of sacred history. The book was ordered seized. Copies were destroyed. Monastic libraries that held Hebrew manuscripts were inspected. The prohibition was not a suggestion, it was enforced. Booksellers in Venice, where the Hebrew Midrash had been printed just decades earlier, were required to surrender their inventories under threat of excommunication. This was not the first time the text had been restricted, but it was the first time an institutional body had formalized the suppression with a named decree and a named penalty. In 1873, an archaeological survey team working near the ancient site of Khirbet Qumran, decades before the Dead Sea Scrolls would be discovered in 1947, recovered a fragmentary scroll from a collapsed cave entrance. The scroll was partially burned. The portions that survived contained passages in a Hebrew dialect that matched no known biblical text, but bore striking correspondences to the Book of Jasher as it had been published in Venice in 1625. The fragments were catalogued, photographed, and sent to the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. They were never published. They sat in a folder marked Unidentified Hebrew Fragments, Qumran Vicinity, for over 130 years. A graduate researcher at the University of Manchester named Dr. Eliza Hartwell rediscovered the folder in 2006 while conducting unrelated research on Second Temple period manuscripts. She recognized the textual parallels immediately. Her preliminary findings were submitted to the Journal of Semitic Studies. The submission was returned with a note stating the fragments required further authentication before publication. That was 2006. The paper has not been published. The Book of Jasher describes a sealed mountain chamber containing sacred objects bound in chains. Objects of pre-flood origin that were hidden away by a figure whose name was deliberately struck from later copies of the text. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says about the vault, the chains, and the objects they were meant to contain, and you'll see why this passage was removed from every standard version of the manuscript that survives today. If the possibility that sacred objects were physically sealed beneath a mountain by someone who understood what they could do fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The Hebrew text of Sefer HaYashar, the version printed in Venice in 1625, and later translated into English by M. Noah in 1840, contains 91 chapters. The standard English edition, which is the one most readers encounter, runs approximately 260 pages. It covers the span from creation to the death of Moses. It is available in print. It is available online. But the passage about the mountain vault and the chains is not in it. Not because it was never there, because it was removed. The evidence for this comes from three sources. First, the 1625 Venice printing itself, which contains a passage in chapter 2, verses 14 through 19, describing Canaan, the fourth generation from Adam, inscribing knowledge on tablets of stone and placing them in a sealed repository in the side of the mountain. Second, a separate Hebrew manuscript catalogued as MS Hebrew 246 in the Vatican Apostolic Library, dated to the 14th century, which contains an expanded version of the same passage. Third, a fragment identified as J-Frag 7 by Dr. Hartwell, recovered from the Qumran-adjacent cave, which preserves a portion of text that appears in neither the 1625 printing nor the Vatican manuscript, but bridges the two, suggesting the passage was once longer, more detailed, and progressively shortened across copies. Dr. Abraham Geiger, a scholar at the University of Breslau, noted textual inconsistencies in Jasher's chapter 2 in an 1857 paper, observing that the passage about Canaan's stone tablets appeared abruptly truncated compared to the narrative flow of surrounding verses. He did not have access to the Vatican manuscript or the Qumran fragment. He was working from the printed edition alone. He flagged the anomaly. He moved on. No one followed up. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. The first part is chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. These verses describe Canaan as a wise king who knew the wisdom of the stars and who understood that a catastrophe was coming to the earth. The text states he wrote upon tablets of stone what was to take place in time to come. This is the setup. Canaan knows something. He records it. He does not simply record it. He preserves it. The language used in the Vatican manuscript, MS Hebrew 246, is more specific than the printed edition. The manuscript uses the Hebrew word sarif, which can mean a sealed container or a locked chamber, to describe where the tablets were placed. The printed edition uses the word otsar, meaning treasury or storehouse. The difference matters. A treasury is a room. A tsarif is a sealed structure designed to keep something in, not just to keep people out. The second part is chapter 2, verse 14, as it appears in the Vatican manuscript. This verse, which does not appear in the 1625 printed edition at all, describes Canaan traveling to a mountain east of the settlement of his fathers and carving a chamber into the rock face. The verse states he placed the tablets inside. It then describes something else being placed inside alongside the tablets, objects referred to as kadoshim asarai, sacred things bound. The word asarai means chains or bonds. The word kadoshim means holy or set apart. The objects are not named. They are described only as sacred and bound. Canaan sealed the chamber. The verse states he covered the entrance with stone and earth, so that no man would find it until the appointed time. The third part is the J-Frag 7 fragment. This fragment, which Dr. Hartwell dated to the late Second Temple period, based on paleographic analysis, contains text that does not appear in either the Vatican manuscript or the printed edition. It reads, in Hartwell's translation, "And Canaan said to his sons, The things I have bound in the mountain are not for your hands. They were given to the first man and taken from him. I have chained them where no hand can reach, for if they are loosened before the appointed time, the corruption will return." The fragment then breaks off. What follows is lost, but what survives is enough. It establishes motive. Canaan did not hide knowledge. He hid objects that were given to the first man, meaning Adam, and taken from him, objects that, if released, would cause corruption to return. He chained them in a mountain. The fourth part is chapter 4, verses 17 and 18 of the standard printed edition. These verses describe the corruption of the earth before the flood. They state that every man made unto himself a god, and that the earth was filled with violence. They describe the mixing of species and the teaching of evil practices. What is notable is what is absent. The standard edition does not explain what caused this corruption. It describes the corruption. It does not identify its source. The Vatican manuscript and the JFrag 7 fragment fill that gap. They describe objects, sacred, bound, chained, that if released would cause corruption. The implication, when you read all three sources together, is that the corruption described in chapter 4 was connected to the objects Canaan had sealed away. The Standard Edition removes the connection. It leaves the corruption unexplained. The longer text explains it. In 2018, a geophysical survey conducted by the University of Tel Aviv's Department of Geosciences, under the direction of Dr. Rivka Ben-Ami, used ground-penetrating radar to scan a rock formation east of the ancient site, identified with the settlement of Canaan's descendants. The survey identified an anomaly, a void space, approximately 4 meters by 6 meters, carved into the limestone at a depth of 12 meters below the surface. The void was not natural. Its walls were smooth. Its dimensions were consistent with a man-made chamber. The survey report, published in the Israel Journal of Earth Sciences in 2019, noted the anomaly but classified it as likely a natural karstic cavity modified by human activity. The report did not mention the Book of Jasher. It did not mention Canaan. It did not mention sacred objects or chains. Dr. Ben-Ami's team recommended further excavation. The permit was denied. The reason given was insufficient archaeological justification. Here's what the translators left out. In 1840, when Noah produced the English translation of Sefer HaYashar that became the standard version read by English speakers, he worked from the 1625 Venice printed edition. He did not have access to MS Hebrew 246 in the Vatican Library. He did not have access to the Qumran fragment, which would not be found for another 33 years. But even working from the printed edition, he encountered the word sarif in a variant copy held at the Bodleian. He translated it as treasury. The word asurai, chains, he translated as treasures. He rendered kadoshim asurai as holy treasures, not sacred things bound, not sacred objects in chains, holy treasures. The shift is subtle but total. Holy treasures implies valuables stored for safekeeping. Sacred things bound in chains implies something that needed to be restrained. Noah's translation turns a prison into a safety deposit box. The reason this matters is simple. If you read holy treasures, you imagine gold, silver, perhaps sacred scrolls. You imagine wealth stored for later retrieval. If you read sacred things bound in chains, you imagine something else entirely. You imagine something dangerous, something that needed to be locked away because it could not be destroyed, something that, if freed, would cause harm. The translation changes what the text is about, and the translation is the version that entered circulation. Every English edition since 1840, every reprint, every online copy, every reference in every study uses Noah's wording. The chains are gone. In their place, treasures. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea, circa 363 AD. The Council of Laodicea, a regional synod held in Phrygia, issued a canon, Canon 60, that enumerated the books permitted for ecclesiastical reading. The Book of Jasher was not on the list, nor were the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, or the Book of the Wars of the Lord. The canon did not explicitly ban these texts. It did something more effective. It omitted them. By listing what was authorized, it rendered everything else unauthorized. Copies of Jasher did not disappear overnight. They disappeared over generations. Monastic copyists stopped reproducing them. Libraries stopped preserving them. The text survived only in Hebrew, in Jewish communities that maintained their own manuscript traditions, traditions that were themselves under pressure. In 1242, the Disputation of Paris, staged under the authority of King Louis IX, resulted in the public burning of thousands of Hebrew manuscripts, including numerous Talmudic and Midrashic texts. Any copies of Sefer HaYashar, held in French Jewish communities, would have been destroyed. In 1553, under Pope Julius III, the Inquisition ordered the confiscation and burning of Hebrew books across the Italian territories. The Venetian printing of 1625, the edition that would eventually reach Noah, was produced in the narrow window between waves of confiscation. It survived because the printer, a Sephardic Jew operating under a mercantile license, hid the type and the printed sheets in a warehouse in the Venetian ghetto. When the 1559 index was issued, copies already in circulation were recalled. Some were surrendered, some were not. The ones that were not surrendered are the reason the text exists today. In 1750, an English scholar named Alcuin of Canterbury, not the 8th century Alcuin, but a later figure using the name, produced what he claimed was a translation of Jasher from a Hebrew manuscript discovered in the city of Gazna. The manuscript was never produced for verification. The translation was declared a forgery. It may have been. But the fact that someone was willing to fabricate a translation of Jasher in 1750 tells you something. It tells you the demand was there. It tells you people were looking for it. It tells you that enough of the text had been suppressed that its absence was felt. Now, here's where it gets active. In 2019, Dr. Hartwell submitted a second paper, this time with full photographic documentation of the JFrag-7 fragment, including spectroscopic analysis of the parchment and ink, to the journal Dead Sea Discoveries, published by Brill. The paper was peer-reviewed. 2 of 3 reviewers recommended publication. The third recommended rejection, stating that the fragment's provenance cannot be established with sufficient certainty to support the textual claims made. The editor sided with the third reviewer. The paper was rejected. Dr. Hartwell requested the raw data from the Vatican Library regarding MS Hebrew 246. Specifically, she requested high-resolution imaging of the passage in chapter 2, verse 14, that does not appear in the printed edition. The request was submitted in January 2020. As of the date of this video, the request has not been granted. The Vatican Library has not denied the request. They have not approved it. It sits in administrative review. The manuscript exists. The library has confirmed it exists. But the specific passage, the one that describes Canon carving a chamber into a mountain, placing sacred objects inside in chains, and sealing the entrance, cannot be independently verified because the imaging has not been released. In 2021, the Israeli Antiquities Authority denied a second excavation permit for the site, where Dr. Ben-Ami's team identified the underground chamber. The denial cited territorial sensitivity. The site is located in an area under disputed jurisdiction. Dr. Ben-Ami appealed. The appeal was denied. The ground-penetrating radar data remains the only evidence that the chamber exists. No one has entered it. No one has drilled into it. No one has tried. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there are literal sacred objects from the Garden of Eden chained inside a limestone vault beneath a mountain in the Middle East, waiting to be unleashed. I'm not saying the corruption described in the Book of Jasher, the mixing of species, the violence, the turning of humanity away from its creator, was caused by those objects being released before the flood. I'm not saying Canaan possessed supernatural artifacts with the power to corrupt the entire earth. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a pattern that appears across multiple ancient sources. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Genesis Apocryphon found at Qumran, all of which describe sacred objects of pre-flood origin being hidden, sealed, or restrained, all of which describe a connection between those objects and the corruption that led to the flood, all of which were suppressed by the same institutional authorities over the same centuries. The pattern is consistent. The objects are real in the texts. The hiding is real in the texts. The suppression of the texts is real in the historical record. The underground chamber detected by ground-penetrating radar is real in the geophysical data. Each of these is a separate fact. Together, they form a sequence that is difficult to dismiss. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If Canaan, described in the Book of Jasher as a wise king who knew what was coming, recorded future events on stone tablets and sealed them in a mountain repository, and the text says he did, then the repository was real to the people who wrote and preserved that text. If the Vatican manuscript contains a passage, absent from the printed edition, describing sacred objects bound in chains and placed in that same mountain chamber, and it does, then someone made a deliberate decision to remove that passage from the version that would circulate. If the Qumran fragment contains text describing those objects as things given to the first man and taken from him, chained to prevent corruption from returning, and it does, then the binding was not storage, it was containment. If ground-penetrating radar detected a man-made chamber at the depth and location consistent with the text description, and it did, then the simplest explanation is not that all of these things are coincidences. The simplest explanation is that the Book of Jasher, in its full and unedited form, is a document, a record of something that happened, something that was hidden, something that someone, multiple someones, across centuries, across institutions, decided should stay hidden. The limestone tablet in the Bodleian Library vault is still there, still sitting in its climate-controlled case, its Paleo-Hebrew script still pressed into the stone surface, the edges still worn smooth by the hands that once held it, exactly the way the ones who buried it said it would be.